This is the third session in our conversation with Delegate C.T. Wilson. Now listen, C.T. was the chief prosecutor, was a chief prosecutor in his life, where he took criminals and he convicted them and prosecuted them. Now he is a defense attorney, and he is a delegate for the state of Maryland, an elected official, and he has been, I'll let him tell you the story, but on both sides of the law. He has a great perspective on policing in our culture. So we're going to have a conversation about policing in our culture and the whole defund the police versus train the police. We're going to start to have that conversation. So join us, because we want to talk about policing. So let's talk. So, CT, while we're having this conversation, there is a part of this conversation that, again, could get a bit uncomfortable, but needs to be had. And you bring a really unique perspective to it. You are the state delegate for District 28 here in Charles County. You are currently a defense attorney, but prior to that, you were the Maryland State prosecuting attorney. So you've kind of been on both sides of the law enforcement question. So here's what I'd like to have a conversation about. I'd like to have a conversation about Black Lives Matter in general, but the bigger conversation about policing, defunding the police, retraining the police, retooling the police, whatever. The big phrase that's out there right now that I'm hearing a lot of is reimagining policing and reimagining public safety. So I'd like to have that conversation. So just jump in wherever you want to.
And as you said, I was a former chief prosecutor in Prince George's County for 8 years and did mostly homicides. And then I've been a defense attorney for about 18 years now. And so I've worked both sides as well as being a lawmaker. So first of all, I want to just briefly touch on the Black Lives Matter movement, because I've got plenty of white friends that are, some are very angry about it. They, all lives matter. We're like, well, nobody said they didn't.
Right.
So I always tell people, when you see the words Black Lives Matter, remember there is a silent comma, too. It's saying that Black Lives Matter too, because sometimes that's forgotten.
Yes.
And here's the problem. As an African American, I've been harassed in this county by police officers. I've literally been arrested and charged with grand theft for absolutely no reason. I was at a job one time. I got fired. I wanted to walk out. And of course, because I wanted to fly the bird at my former boss, he said, "Don't steal that laptop." Now, mind you, I was the only black engineer. Very embarrassing. I didn't have a laptop on me. I just had a computer bag that was empty. The cops were called. Immediately, they came, tore my car up, laid me on the ground, face down with a gun in my face, opened up the computer bag. I took him down to the shop, the company shop that I just got fired from, where the computer bag was. They still took me to jail. They still printed me. They still charged me with grand theft over $25,000. That's still on my record today. It has precluded me from getting plenty of federal jobs. God has blessed me because that opportunity has forced me into where I'm at, which is a clearly better position.
Right.
I tried to be a police officer. I couldn't because of my criminal record, but I was able to train them.
Right.
So again, it does exist.
Right.
This isn't something old. This is not something that it's recent. There is a very strained relationship between African Americans and police.
Right.
And the problem is, we've heard of the war on drugs, right? Or the war on crime. I was a combat soldier. I am indignant that you're going to use the word war, because a war on crime means that the solution is a war solution. That means a war solution. So you have individuals out there thinking that they're a combat.
Right.
And when I was in combat, you know how you could tell all the enemy combatants? By how they weren't dressed like you.
Right.
And that's how that's being treated. These war zones, when people delineate them as war zones, then you are dehumanizing those individuals. And to protect and serve, you need both.
Right.
And I'll say this, anybody of common sense, African Americans need police more than anybody. Our communities need to be policed. I don't know anybody who owns a home that doesn't want police. They want fair policing. They want just policing.
Right.
They want their lives to matter, but we need good policing. Because when we don't get it, it's our community that suffers. Our schools go down. We can't get pizza delivered at the house. Right. So no African American that I know says we should get rid of cops. But we do want equal treatment. And what we're seeing now, only because of videotape, is things that we've been alleging for years, that we are treated unfairly. And ask yourself this question, Pastor. I'm a 240-pound African American. Most of these cops, I will ask them, how are you going to arrest me if I don't want to be arrested? Nobody wants to be arrested.
Right.
But you're out of shape. You can't run faster than me. You can't out wrestle me. So now what you have? You have your gun. Because you're not in shape, you can't arrest me. That's a problem.
Right.
And I mean, we need to pay our officers way more and expect way more of them. And there needs to be a body camera on every officer, because those will be the solutions that bring the trust back. And it is a much longer conversation, but I want people to understand it is a very valid conversation. And right now I got people talking about defund the police. That's the lunatic fringe. Please make no mistake.
Right.
But then you also have the people on the far right that said, no, the status quo will work.
Yeah, that
The status quo won't work. And, you know, George Floyd's death has sparked up something almost unimaginable in the black community. We never thought we'd see the day where the Mississippi flag comes down, where NASCAR would get rid of the Confederate flag. We're taking down these monuments. But those are just symbolic victories. In fact, to most of us like me, it's not a victory at all. I'm not winning nothing. But if we can get our police officers to be better trained, better paid, in the community, living in the community, kids going to school in this community, those are the things that I think would benefit African Americans. Because right now, in many communities, we're seen as the outsiders in our own community.
Right.
And that's what we need to get rid of. When I was a prosecutor, one of the things I focused on was community prosecution. I wish Charles County would do it. And what it was is we would go out to solve all the problems of the community, including crime.
Right.
It wouldn't just be arresting people. Sometimes instead of going after the drug dealer, let's just shut that drug house down. If we're gonna arrest a young black man for having drug paraphernalia, let's make sure that carryout doesn't sell the same drug paraphernalia that he's using. Do you remember growing up back in the day, they used to have these roses. They were in a glass vial like this. You ever seen them? You know what those are? Those are crack vials.
I had no idea.
And me neither. What else? I don't know what a little amount of trouble you've ever been in with your wife, but a little rose won't do it, right?
Right.
You break off the ends, you put a piece of steel wool in there, and those are crack vials. They're only crack vials. We allowed them to be sold, but we arrested people for them, but not for selling them. See, we need to get better at that. We need to know what the community needs instead of just saying, well, I'm locking everybody up. And officers also need to realize not every order is a lawful one.
Right.
Just because you say, like we watched some protests that were broken up in a heinous way.
Right.
And sometimes if you see a 5-year-old man wandering towards you, even if your instructions were clear the street, you take him by the shoulders, turn him around. He may just be confused.
Right.
Okay, because he's 75 and you're armored up. But we can't keep treating the African American communities like they're war zones, because they're not combatants, and most of them cats are not fit to be a combatant in this on our United States military.
Well, I've often wondered. Now I don't know. I've read some on it, and I've heard the academics speak of defund the police.
Yeah.
What I don't know is, what I've never heard anybody speak about, even the academics, is what you replace them with. But here's been my concern. Once you defund and get rid of the police, or just decrease them like a number of cities are doing, if you just decrease the police presence, I'm going to say this in a fairly crass way, but they ain't leaving the rich communities.
I know. I know. Now, I also want you, please don't forget when you guys watch those videos, you see all the protests, there's a whole bunch of white people out there protesting.
Yes,
okay?
there are.
Let's not be listening. And a lot of white politicians are behind something because they'll never have to live with the outcome.
Right. And I said I said it that way on purpose.
Yeah.
They're not leaving the rich communities.
Without a doubt.
Because now they're not diverse enough, but all those communities are somewhat, at least slightly diverse.
Believe me.
And the poor communities are not monolithic either.
That's correct.
You know, I came up poor white trash. Yeah. So, you know, I know what that's about.
Yep.
But these police, they're leaving the poor neighborhoods.
I know.
That's where they're going to pull them out
of.
of.
Believe me, I'm a defense attorney. My clients, some of them are predators.
Yeah.
They're not a victim of the system. They obviously some of them didn't come up well. A lot of them came up in Prince George County, which is the wealthiest African-American county in the country.
Right.
So they chose to be criminals. They choose to victimize, and they always victimize their own community. So yes, without a doubt, I don't think that that's missed on anyone, especially African Americans. So again, when they talk about defund or reimagine, the issue is this. Any way you cut it, if you want to get on a handle on crime, you're going to spend more money than we're spending now.
Right.
Because if you want a counselor to go out on a homeless vagrancy call,
right,
you're still going to need a police officer with him, because you would not send that individual out there just in case this guy has drug problems. He might be on drugs. He might be schizophrenic. That counselor is not. But I agree. We could have a counselor. I don't want that cop to have to know all this information about mental health, about fire, about how to cut weeds. Right. I agree. But everything that they're talking about defund actually is going to cost more money.
Right.
And I'm fine with that. Let's get to that. I want our cops to have the respect that they deserve. I just want them to treat us like we deserve. That means they need to be better trained. They need to understand it, and they also need to have more to lose. Because right now, a lot of times I've seen it for years. They get in trouble, the county pays out, the taxpayer pays out, nothing comes out of their pocket. Right. And I think what's going to happen, the solution again, body camera's going to take care of a lot of this. Because at the end of the day, and you'll be protecting cops. I don't know a single cop who wouldn't want to be protected from false charges. Right. But I know that we also need to trust. Because in the African American community, it's getting to the point now where you don't trust a cop, or the cop is the enemy. And they're not, because I tell people all the time, but if you went home and your house is broken into, who are you calling? It's not Ghostbusters. Right. Now, I'll say this caveat, but if you're African American, are you worried when you come the cop's going to mistake you for the criminal? Right. And yes, if I'm a black man, I am.
Well, I worry that the whole thing is spinning itself up to a point that it can't get better, it can only get worse, because the African American community is defensive of itself, rightfully so, against police officers already. But now people are targeting police officers, so now you've got them further on edge.
That's correct.
So all the men and women walking around with loaded guns are now feeling threatened.
Yes, and not supported, which is even
and
more
not supported.
Yes.
And so now you've got, somebody's got to de-escalate this whole thing.
And I honestly believe that calmer heads will prevail. I think this defund the police, I'll say this, the right has used that term way more than the left, because they've ran with it. They're very good at labeling, and they politicize that. Right. And the nonsensical, obliterate the police and all that, again, those are for folks that really, I guess have nothing to lose, because for most of us, we want to be protected. Everyone I know wants to be protected, but we do need to come to a balance, and that's going to come with a conversation and an investment. When I wrote my op-ed, I talked about police officers having better oversight and accountability, about them actually having degrees, because I would like them, if you're on my streets, you should be a subject matter expert in the law. Every one of our FBI agents, every one of our CIA agents, at least have to have a bachelor's degree. Right. Why would you? And they don't deal with citizens that often. Right. Why wouldn't the guy who deals with them every day he should need to know the law as well? But see, that all costs money. Right. They should carry malpractice insurance like lawyers and doctors and CPAs.
That's an idea I heard that I thought was very interesting. Is have police officers carry their own malpractice insurance,
or as a union.
And then as it gets, one officer acting out causes his insurance to go sky high, and you get rid of him for financial reasons. Even if you're not making the moral choice, you're making the financial choice.
That was my idea. I've been pushing that for the last 3 or 4 months. Yes, and things like that, like you said, where it's no longer about is he going to get fired or not, but he can't continue to work, much like lawyers and doctors, because we're not insurable, we can't work. There are things like that we can do. And what's funny is those are the drastic things I want to do that I'm called fascist for. Because at the end of the day, I don't want to get rid of our police force. I don't want them to feel unsupported. And I know, like, even the education, there are plenty of individuals out there. Some of my best friends, they're not college educated, they're great police officers. That's not something we can do immediately. Right. But I also know if we want to raise the standard, then we have to double the pay. Right. We have to treat them like professionals, but allow them to be professionals and expect them to be professionals. And I hope that we can use this moment to breach that, to go forward and make sure. Because it can, and I'll tell you, I think things look bad, but don't forget who you're talking about. You're talking about the media and what they show you. Yes. Okay. You're talking about, politicians, and let's be honest, a lot of the police unions, they're pretty much politically driven. Yeah. And they call it the blue flu, where, they're not going to go into work. And I was like, you don't get to do that at Target, so you should just be fired. I don't want to hear all that nonsense. You don't get to say I'm not going into work, or I'm gonna sit at my job and do nothing all day. I'm like, well, if your police chief doesn't know who's working, who's not, then he too should be fired. I believe there's a resolution that's gonna come. Now, here's the unfortunate part, and I say this with a little bit of temerity because I know this is not everybody's be happy with it. Not everyone is going to be happy. I've seen so many, especially from white people saying, this is how you protest. And there's Martin Luther King walking. And there's, he's walking. I was like, you didn't show the ones of him getting beat down with a baseball bat, though, did you? Right. The thing is, when Colin Kaepernick knelt in a peaceful protest, they demonized and villainized him like he was next to Satan. That was peaceful protest. Nothing happened.
Right.
But now that things started burning, something happens. That is a horrible part about our country. Time and time again, it's been through violence. My daughter said it. He said, Dad, how much do you think the Tea Party cost? It wasn't peaceful. They destroyed a lot, and it is not a good thing. We should be able to come to change before we have that kind of outcry. I want this to be the last time things burn down and people feel so helpless and so voiceless that they turn to violence. Because the problem is most of those folks were caught up in the violence. They weren't violent. There was a few, the lunatic fringe, that caused a lot of damage. And now all protesters are perceived as violent. I've talked to friends of mine who are like, yeah, every time they protest with their hands up, they were screaming the people behind them throwing rocks. And I was like, so again, you villainize everybody on that side. And I think that we can do much better as a community. And I think we will on that. I think because at the end of the day, we're not getting rid of police. I don't think people want that, but we don't want the status quo.
Right. Okay, my reading, because being chair of the board down at Southern Wesleyan, I try to do some reading and keep up with the academic world, which is a whole different world into itself, you know. So, but I read a lot. There's just a lot of defund the police stuff coming through academia.
Sure.
And so, you know, I read this and then I know that I don't know any of the details. New York's going to cut $1 billion out of their police department.
It's out of $7 billion though. It's now down to $6 billion.
Okay.
So
then Minneapolis, whatever they did to disband, I think is the word. I don't know what that means. Now, I may love the program behind it. I don't know the program behind any of it.
I'll tell you what Camden, New Jersey did. They defunded the police 10 years ago. But you know what they really did? Fired every one of the police officers and made them all reapply for their jobs. And Camden used to be a hellhole, excuse the language, and they have come a much way. And I'm not saying that's what needs to be done. I'm saying you can make change without destroying the system in place. You can make positive change.
Fundamental change.
Right. The problem is the other side doesn't want to make any change. Because they feel making change is acknowledging that they're wrong. And unfortunately, it's not even their fight. That's what I'm saying. So to me, there are changes to be made. The defund the police argument means you'll take away from cops, but you'll put more money into community programs. But remember, that's a residual. So you're still gonna have to pay for all these cops until that takes effect, which could be 10 years down the road. So again, it's still gonna cost you. And my question is, what's Breonna Taylor's life worth? What's George Floyd's life worth? What's the life worth? What's the life of the individuals who got shot in Chicago this weekend? What are their lives worth? Because they deserve to be protected too.
They do.
And I believe we got
the 1-year-old that was shot in. I can't get over that story. But how much? Let me speak to Delegate Wilson for just a minute. How much of this defund or reimagine the police is going on in jurisdictions in Maryland that you're aware of?
They're trying to do it as a state. There is again that's a fringe group that's trying to defund. You know, a lot of Baltimore area that are trying to say, let's get rid of all cops, let's abolish police, and then figure out some other method.
Do you know what their plan is if they would do that?
Really
throw
is.
me a plan.
The plan is take that money, invest it back in the community, which pretends that bad guys don't exist. But literally pretends that criminals don't exist and they wouldn't exist if not for circumstances. But we know since the beginning of time, crime has existed, even in the best of circumstances. So again, those individuals, but they're rare. They may be loud and squeaky wheels because guess what? Most of us go to work every day. You don't write op-eds. Okay, most of us don't sit around and talk about that. You try to make it to the next day. So I don't believe their voices will prevail. Again, it's mostly nonsense. It mostly has to do with reinvesting. And I'm not saying every idea is bad. I'm saying that the word defund the police disincentivizes anybody from moving forward.
So what? Can you give me? I don't know if you can. I didn't prep you for this. So can you give me some idea of what would community safety look like in a defunded police world, or whatever the right phrase is, in a reimagined?
If you reimagine it in a perfect world, the way that I could see actually working, you would have law enforcement in tandem with other individuals like community counselors, homeless, people, people that can go out and deal with a problem. But I still believe that law enforcement will be involved. I believe it would be the community policing aspect where officers walk a beat. They don't just sit in their cruiser and wait till they arrest somebody. Where they get to know their community, where they're talking to the community members and know what their needs are and know which house is the troubled house, which house is the drug house, who's got the DV, where the senior citizens live, so they can ask them, hey, what's going on?
Yeah.
And get the skinny on the neighborhood.
Right.
That's how it should work. Now, what they're asking for is something totally different. And again, it's frustrating for me is a lot of people that are asking that have never worked in law enforcement.
Right.
All they say is this system doesn't work. And I used to always say it to my Republican friends. I'm like, the difference between me and them, I say, is they get to say no. I can always say no if I have a but. So my thing is, until you get a working solution,
Right.
it's going to be what it is.
Well, I read somewhere, some member of the House of Representatives, I guess, some elected politician in Washington, said that a world without police would look like a suburb. And I'm just not quite. That feels a lot like rainbows and unicorns to me. I'm not sure
It's
that's
also
true.
willful ignorance.
Yeah.
That means you haven't really gone to these areas.
Yeah.
Because if you go to these areas and you talk to the citizens, you talk to my wife's family's from Chicago. Go ask her uncle what she thinks about that nonsense, about what he thinks about that nonsense, because clearly he's watched his property value tumble down to nothing.
Right.
Because a world without police in Chicago on the South Side is
Right.
the criminals run the show.
Yeah.
Just like there's other countries where the police are paid off by who? The gangs.
Well, that's what I think. You know, we've done a lot of work as a church in third world countries.
Yes, and you've seen that.
Yes, and when there's a lack of police
That's right.
presence, there is a local militia that takes
That's
care of
right.
that, and they're put together by whoever's the strongest.
That's exactly, and that battle changes all that
Yes.
changes all that landscape changes all the
does.
time. When I was overseas,
does.
it was the warlords in charge, and you didn't have to necessarily steal something. You might just disagree with him or looked at his daughter, and now you were dead.
Yes.
So believe me,
Yes.
that the idea, we're not going to have that acrimony in this country. We're not going to have vigilante justice because we can't afford it. And calmer heads will prevail. Again, like I said in the first episode, that emotional nonsense that they're trying to pull us into, we'll be fine.
So we're a little over time, but let me ask you a question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to. You reckon this thing gets solved or starts to calm down once we get through with the election? No.
Not at all. This is not political like people think it is. There are a lot of people.
At least the defund the police part?
No, it's not political. There are a lot of people literally they're latching onto this. This
Well,
has
I hope
nothing.
so, because I'm hoping we actually see change.
A lot of these same people who want to defund the police also won't vote. They don't even believe in that system.
Right.
So no, this is going to be a minute.
One of the things I've said to people is we have traveled a lot, and what I don't want to see the U.S. do is come to the place that we increase the value of talk to the point that talk is the point.
Yeah.
Because if we do, that is the one common denominator of third world countries we've served in. I've served in third world countries in Africa, the Caribbean, Central America, South America, Asia, right? The one common denominator is we value the conversation and don't care about the progress. And I really don't want to see us go there because I think we can do better.
And I just want you to make sure the word "we" includes you and everybody listening, because sometimes people look to our elected officials like somehow they're going to make the difference, and that's not how it works. I can't legislate a man's heart.
Right.
I can't legislate a man's actions. I can write finite amount of things into law. But we, as people, you're right, we can do a whole lot. And that's what I'm looking forward to, that part of we, not the political. Yeah.
So I'm hoping for one day when a whole lot of people across our church, across our state, across our nation, kind of sit across the table like you and I are, and just have a conversation.
Yep.
Don't have to agree all the time,
Just see where
but
it leads.
in the end, we get to know each other,
Yes, sir.
and I think that'll be the answer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for doing
Awesome,
this.
brother.
All
Thank
right. Thanks for joining us today. You just heard our conversation about policing inside of our culture. And listen, let me just say this. I'm not sure the same answer is the right answer for every community across our nation. So let's stop jumping into one corner or another and calling everybody else names. Instead, here's what I don't want you to do. I want you to pray for the men and women who work to keep us safe every day. I want you to pray for their hearts. I want you to pray for the men and women who are deciding how that should be done, how that should be funded, how that should be improved, how that should be trained. I want you to pray for those people. And I want you to pray for every encounter. Ask the Holy Spirit to give understanding and peace inside of our culture. Hey, If today's session was helpful to you, we want you to share it. We want you to like it. We want you to subscribe. We want you to comment. All those things you can do to help us connect with more and more and more people, because Jesus is the answer and we want to talk about it.